The marriage had been quiet from the very beginning. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that didn't come from peace, but from distance so deep it echoed. Mara Lewis sat every morning at the long dining table of the Kang estate, stirring tea that always grew cold by the time her husband arrived. She had been married for nearly 3 years to Hyun-woo Kang, their feared Korean Mafia boss, whose empire stretched across Los Angeles like an invisible net. They shared a home, shared legal documents, shared a future arranged by power and necessity. But they had never shared a touch, not a kiss, not an embrace, not even a brush of fingers. Hyun-woo kept a careful distance, polite, protective, respectful, yet impossible to read. Mara didn't know if he disliked her, feared intimacy, or simply saw her as part of a business transaction. But she knew one thing. Silence was slowly breaking her heart. Everything changed on a stormy Thursday evening when Mara received devastating news about her mother. As she collapsed into a panic attack on the living room floor, Hyun-woo burst through the door and saw his wife trembling, gasping, completely alone in her terror. For the first time in 3 years, he broke his own rules. He knelt in front of her, cupped her face with both hands, and whispered the words that would change everything. "You're not alone. You never were." Welcome to Korean Mafia Lovers. Hello everyone. Please let us know where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. Your support is essential for us to continue bringing you these stories. Mara Lewis had learned to live with silence, not the comfortable kind that came from contentment, but the heavy, suffocating silence that filled every corner of the Kang estate like an invisible fog. She moved through the marble halls of her husband's mansion like a ghost haunting her own life, her footsteps echoing in spaces too grand, too cold, too empty of the warmth she'd grown up with. At 27, she had been Mrs. Kang for nearly 3 years. 3 years of polite good mornings and distant good nights. 3 years of sitting at opposite ends of a dining table that could seat 20. 3 years of sleeping in separate bedrooms, living separate lives under the same roof. 3 years without a single touch. Mara stood at the kitchen window, watching the Los Angeles skyline shimmer in the morning heat. Her reflection stared back at her, a beautiful black woman with natural curls framing her face, wearing a simple yellow sundress that had been her mother's favorite color. She pressed her palm against the glass, remembering how her childhood home had been filled with music, laughter, and embraces that came as naturally as breathing. Here, in this mansion that could house 50 families, she felt smaller than she ever had in her mother's tiny apartment. "Mrs. Kang," Mina, the head housekeeper, appeared beside her. "Your tea is ready in the dining room." Mara nodded, forcing a smile. "Thank you, Mina. Is Mr. Kang?" "He left early for a meeting. He said he'd be back this evening." Of course he had. Hyun-woo Kang, her husband in name only, moved through his days like a shadow she could never quite catch. He was always leaving before she woke, returning after she'd retreated to her room. When they did cross paths, he was unfailingly polite, asking about her day, ensuring she had everything she needed, treating her with the careful respect one might show a valuable houseguest. But never, not once, had he touched her. Mara made her way to the dining room, her bare feet silent on the cold marble. The morning routine was always the same: tea at the head of the table, toast she wouldn't finish, and the morning paper filled with news of a world that felt increasingly distant from her own. She had married Hyun-woo to save her family. When her younger brother Marcus had gotten involved with the wrong crowd and owed money to dangerous people, Hyun-woo had appeared like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known how to pray. He'd offered protection, safety, a solution that seemed too good to be true. The price had been marriage, not love, not companionship. Just her name on a legal document that would place her family under his protection. She had agreed because she had no choice. Her mother worked 3 jobs just to keep their heads above water. Marcus was barely 18 and terrified. The alternative was unthinkable, but she hadn't expected the loneliness to feel like drowning. Mara sipped her tea and tried to remember the last time someone had hugged her. Really hugged her. Her mother, probably, the day before the wedding. Helena Lewis had held her daughter tight and whispered, "Baby girl, you're so brave, so strong. Don't forget who you are in that big house." But some days, Mara felt like she was disappearing entirely. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made her look up. Sungjin Park, Hyunwoo's right-hand man, appeared in the doorway. He was younger than her husband, with kind eyes that always seemed to hold secrets. "Good morning, Mrs. Kang," he said, bowing slightly. "I hope you're well." "I'm fine, thank you." She set down her teacup. "Is everything all right? You look concerned." Sungjin hesitated, glancing around as if checking for listening ears. "Mrs. Kang, may I speak freely?" Something in his tone made her heart skip. "Of course. Mr. Kang, he asks about you. Every day. How you're feeling, if you need anything, whether you seem happy." Sungjin's voice was quiet, careful. "He cares more than he shows." Mara's throat tightened. "Then why doesn't he show it?" "Because he's afraid," Sungjin said simply. "He's afraid of what his world might do to you. He's afraid that getting close to you will put you in danger. And he's afraid." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "He's afraid you'll see who he really is and decide you want to leave." The confession hung in the air between them. Like a bridge, Mara wasn't sure she was ready to cross. "I can't leave," she whispered. "Even if I wanted to. The marriage protects my family." "But do you want to?" Sungjin asked gently. "Leave?" Mara stared into her tea, watching the steam curl upward like prayers she couldn't voice. Did she want to leave? Some days, yes. Some days. The silence felt like a prison, and she fantasized about running back to her mother's apartment, back to a life that was small but warm. But other days, she caught glimpses of something in Hyunwoo's eyes when he thought she wasn't looking. Something that made her wonder what kind of man lived beneath the careful distance. Something that made her want to reach across the space between them and touch his hand. "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't know who he is. How can I know what I want when I don't even know my own husband?" Sungjin nodded, as if he'd expected that answer. "He's not what people think, Mrs. Kang. He's not what he pretends to be. But he's been pretending for so long, I think he's forgotten how to be anything else." Before Mara could respond, the sound of a car in the driveway made them both freeze. Sungjin straightened, his expression shifting back to professional neutrality. "That's unexpected," he murmured, checking his phone. "Mr. Kang isn't supposed to be back until tonight." The front door opened with a heavy thud, followed by rapid footsteps and voices speaking in urgent Korean. Mara couldn't understand the words, but she recognized the tone. Something was wrong. Hyunwoo appeared in the dining room doorway, and Mara's breath caught. She'd seen him in passing hundreds of times, but never like this. Never when he was unguarded. Never when his careful composure had cracked. He was devastatingly handsome. Even in crisis. Sharp cheekbones, intense dark eyes, black hair slightly disheveled from running his hands through it. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his tie loosened. There was something wild in his expression, something that made her pulse quicken. His eyes found hers across the room, and for a moment the world stopped. "Mara," he said, and her name on his lips sounded different than it ever had before. Urgent, important, real. "What's wrong?" she asked, standing instinctively. Hyunwoo exchanged a look with Sungjin, some silent communication passing between them. When he turned back to her, his expression had shifted into something she'd never seen before. Not the polite distance she was used to, but something raw and protective. "There's been a development," he said carefully. "Someone's been asking questions about you, about your family." Mara's blood turned to ice. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that means our arrangement might not be enough anymore." Hyunwoo stepped closer, and she caught the scent of his cologne, something clean and expensive that made her head spin. "I need to know you're safe. I need to know they can't get to you." "They." Mara's voice came out smaller than she intended. "People who want to hurt me," Hyunwoo said, his jaw tightening. "People who think hurting you would be the best way to do it." The words hit her like a physical blow. She had known intellectually that being married to a man like Hyunwoo came with risks, but she had never truly understood what that meant until this moment. "What do we do?" she whispered. Hyunwoo's hands clenched at his sides, and she saw him fight some internal battle. When he spoke, his voice was rough with an emotion she couldn't name. "We change the rules." The rules had been simple for 3 years. Maintain distance, ensure safety, keep the arrangement professional. But as Hyun-woo stood in the dining room watching fear flicker across Mara's beautiful face, he realized those rules had been built on a foundation of lies he'd told himself. The biggest lie? That distance would protect her. "What do you mean, change the rules?" Mara asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Hyun-woo glanced at Sung-jin, who nodded and quietly left the room, closing the doors behind him. For the first time in 3 years, Hyun-woo and Mara were truly alone. "The marriage was supposed to be enough," Hyun-woo said, moving closer to the table, but still maintaining the careful distance that had become second nature. "My name, my protection, the legal connection, it should have been enough to keep you safe." "But it's not anymore?" "No." The word came out harder than he intended. "Someone's been watching you, following you when you go to the market, when you visit your mother. They're testing boundaries, seeing how close they can get." Mara sank back into her chair, the color draining from her face. "How long has this been happening?" 2 weeks. Hyun-woo's jaw clenched. "I've had men watching you without your knowledge. I should have told you sooner, but I hoped we could handle it quietly." "Without my knowledge?" Mara's voice sharpened. "You've been having me followed." "Protected," Hyun-woo corrected, but he could see the anger building in her eyes. "Mara, you have to understand." "No, you have to understand." She stood, her yellow sundress bright against the dark wood of the dining room. "I've been living in this house for 3 years like a ghost. You barely speak to me, you never touch me, you treat me like I'm made of glass. And now you tell me I've been under surveillance this whole time?" The pain in her voice hit him like a physical blow. Hyun-woo had spent 3 years convincing himself that his distance was kindness, that his restraint was protection. But looking at her now, really looking at her, he could see what his careful boundaries had cost. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she was lonely, isolated, fading away in a house that should have been a home. "I was trying to protect you," he said quietly. "From what? From you? From your world? Or from having an actual marriage?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Hyun-woo felt something crack inside his chest, some wall he'd built so carefully that he'd forgotten it was there. "From all of it," he admitted. "From everything I touch that turns to ash." Mara stared at him, and for a moment her anger softened into something that looked almost like understanding. "I'm not ash," she said quietly. "I'm your wife, and I'm tired of being protected from my own life." Before Hyun-woo could respond, his phone buzzed with an urgent message. He glanced at it and cursed under his breath. "What now?" Mara asked. "They're moving faster than we expected." Hyun-woo's mind raced through possibilities, contingencies, ways to keep her safe. "We need to leave tonight." "Leave? Where?" "Somewhere they can't find you. Somewhere I can keep you safe while we deal with this threat." Mara crossed her arms, and Hyun-woo was struck by how strong she looked despite her fear. "And then what? We come back and pretend nothing happened, go back to being strangers in the same house?" "Mara, no." Her voice was firm now, decided. "If we're going to do this, if we're going to run away together, then we're going to do it as husband and wife. Real husband and wife, not whatever this arrangement has been." Hyun-woo's heart stopped. "You don't know what you're asking." "I'm asking for honesty. I'm asking for partnership. I'm asking you to stop treating me like a business transaction and start treating me like a person you chose to marry." "I didn't choose to marry you," Hyun-woo said, and immediately regretted the words when he saw her flinch. "I mean, I know what you mean." Mara's voice was quiet now, hurt. "You married me because you had to, because it was convenient, because it solved a problem." "That's not—" Hyun-woo stopped, frustrated with his inability to explain what he'd never allowed himself to feel. "It started that way, but it's not. It hasn't been that way for a long time." Something shifted in Mara's expression. "What do you mean?" Hyun-woo looked at her, really looked at her, and felt 3 years of careful control beginning to crumble. She was standing in a shaft of afternoon sunlight, her natural hair catching the light, her dark skin glowing warm and beautiful. She was strong and brave and kind, and she had been living in his house like a prisoner, because he'd been too afraid to let her be anything else. "I mean," he said slowly. That somewhere along the way, protecting you stopped being about obligation and started being about something else entirely. What else? The question was barely a whisper, but it hit him like a shout. Hyunwoo took a step closer, then another, until he was standing just a few feet away from her, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes, close enough to catch the scent of her perfume, something floral and warm that had been driving him slowly insane for 3 years. "You want honesty?" he asked, his voice rough. She nodded. "The truth is, I watch you. Every morning when you sit at this table, every evening when you read in the garden, every time you laugh at something on your phone. I watch you and I want things I have no right to want." Mara's breath caught. "What things?" "I want to know what makes you laugh. I want to know what you dream about. I want to know what it would feel like to hold your hand, to kiss you good morning, to fall asleep next to you and wake up with you in my arms." The confession hung between them like a bridge. Neither of them was sure they were brave enough to cross. "Then why haven't you?" Mara asked softly. "Because men like me don't get to have things like you," Hyunwoo said. "Because I'm dangerous and you're good and I refuse to be the reason your light goes out." Mara stepped closer, close enough that he could see the determination in her eyes. "What if I don't want to be protected from you anymore?" she asked. "What if I want to decide for myself what risks are worth taking?" Before Hyunwoo could answer, the sound of cars in the driveway made them both freeze. Multiple engines moving fast, stopping abruptly. Hyunwoo's expression shifted instantly from vulnerable to lethal. "Get behind me," he ordered, his hand moving to the gun concealed beneath his jacket. But Mara didn't move. Instead, she stepped closer to him, her hand finding his arm. "Whatever happens," she said quietly, "we face it together, as husband and wife." Hyunwoo looked down at her hand on his arm, the first time she had ever touched him voluntarily, and felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. "Together," he agreed, just as the front door exploded inward. The men who burst through the front door weren't Hyunwoo's. Mara knew this immediately, from the way her husband's entire body went rigid, from the way his hand moved with deadly precision, to the weapon beneath his jacket, from the way he shifted to place himself between her and the threat without even thinking about it. "Kim Jun's men," Hyunwoo said quietly, his voice carrying a lethal calm that made Mara's blood run cold. "Stay behind me. No matter what happens, stay behind me." But Mara had spent 3 years being protected, 3 years being kept in the dark, 3 years being treated like something fragile that needed to be hidden away. As the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the marble halls of their home, she made a decision that would change everything. She stepped up beside him instead of behind him. "Mara, no, we're in this together," she said firmly, her hand still on his arm. "You said we were changing the rules. This is me changing them too." Hyunwoo's eyes flashed with something between admiration and terror, but before he could argue, Sung-jin appeared in the doorway with 3 of Hyunwoo's men, all armed, all ready. "Sir," Sung-jin said urgently, "they've surrounded the house. 6 men, maybe more. They're not here to negotiate." "How did they get past the perimeter?" Hyunwoo's voice was deadly quiet. "Someone gave them the security codes. Someone on the inside." The betrayal hit the room like a physical blow. Mara felt Hyunwoo's muscles tense beneath her hand, felt the rage rolling off him in waves. "Who?" he asked. "We're still investigating, but sir—" Sung-jin's eyes flicked to Mara, then back to his boss. "They're asking for her. Specifically." Mara's heart stopped. "Me?" "They want to make a trade," Sung-jin continued. "Mrs. Kang for information about your operations. They think—" He hesitated. "They think what?" Hyunwoo's voice could have cut glass. "They think she's just a business arrangement. They think you'll trade her to protect your empire." The silence that followed was deafening. Mara could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the weight of 3 years of distance and misunderstanding pressing down on all of them. Then Hyunwoo laughed. It wasn't a pleasant sound. It was dark and dangerous and full of a violence that made the air itself seem to vibrate. "They think I'll trade her," he repeated, and there was something in his voice that made Mara's breath catch. "They think Mara is just business to me." He turned to look at her then, and the expression in his eyes made her knees weak. There was possession there, yes, but not the cold kind she might have expected. This was hot and fierce and protective in a way that reached into her chest and squeezed her heart. "They have no idea," he said quietly, "what they're asking me to give up." The sound of splintering wood came from somewhere deeper in the house. They were running out of time. "Sir," Sungjin pressed, "what are your orders?" Hyunwoo's jaw clenched. Mara could see him calculating, strategizing, looking for a way out that didn't end in bloodshed. But she could also see the moment he realized there wasn't one. "Get her out," he said finally. "Take the tunnel to the garage, get her somewhere safe." "No," the word came out of Mara's mouth before she could stop it. "I'm not leaving you." "Mara." "I said no." She turned to face him fully, her hand moving from his arm to his chest, right over his heart. 3 years, Hyunwoo. 3 years of you protecting me from everything, including yourself. I'm done being protected. This isn't a game, he said desperately. These men will kill you without thinking twice. Then don't let them. Mara's voice was steady, sure. Fight for me. Fight with me, but don't send me away. Something broke in Hyunwoo's expression. Some final wall crumbling under the weight of 3 years of wanting what he'd convinced himself he couldn't have. "You don't understand what you're asking," he whispered. "I'm asking you to trust me," Mara said. "I'm asking you to let me be your wife instead of your responsibility." The sound of footsteps was getting closer. Voices shouting in Korean, the smell of smoke beginning to drift through the air. Hyunwoo looked at her for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face as if memorizing it. Then, slowly, deliberately, he reached up and covered her hand with his own. The first touch. After 3 years of careful distance, of polite space, of treating each other like strangers, the simple contact of his hand over hers sent electricity shooting through Mara's entire body. His skin was warm, calloused from years of violence she'd never seen, but always known was there. His fingers were long and elegant despite the strength in them. And the way he looked at her as he touched her, like she was something precious and dangerous and worth fighting for, made her feel more alive than she had in years. "If we do this," he said quietly, "if we fight together, there's no going back. You'll see who I really am, what I'm capable of. And once you see that—" "I'm not going anywhere," Mara said firmly. "I'm your wife, Hyunwoo, for better or worse, remember?" A smile ghosted across his lips, the first real smile she'd ever seen from him. "For better or worse," he agreed. Then he lifted their joined hands and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, and Mara's world tilted on its axis. "Sungjin," Hyunwoo said, his voice carrying a new kind of authority. "Change of plans. We make our stand here, together." "Sir." "My wife stays with me," Hyunwoo said, and the way he said "my wife," like a claim, like a promise, like a declaration of war, made Mara's heart race. "Anyone who wants to take her will have to go through me first." The sound of the front door being kicked in echoed through the house. "And trust me," Hyunwoo continued, his hand tightening around Mara's, "that's not going to be easy." As the first shouts rang out and the sound of running feet filled the air, Mara realized that everything was about to change. The careful distance, the polite arrangement, the marriage that had never been a marriage, all of it was about to be tested by fire. But for the first time in 3 years, she wasn't afraid. Because for the first time in 3 years, she wasn't facing it alone. She was facing it with her husband. And he was finally ready to fight for her. The attack came in waves. First, the men who burst through the front entrance, loud, aggressive, meant to draw attention and create chaos. Hyunwoo's security team met them in the main hall, the sound of gunfire echoing through the mansion like thunder. But Hyunwoo wasn't fooled. He knew this was a distraction. "They're coming from the back," he said quietly, his hand still wrapped around Mara's, as he led her through a series of hallways she'd never seen before. "The real threat is the team that's moving through the garden." Mara's mind reeled as she tried to process what was happening. An hour ago, her biggest concern had been the distance between her and her husband. Now she was running through secret passages in a house she'd lived in for 3 years, but apparently never really known. "How many passages are there?" she asked, breathless. "Enough," Hyunwoo replied, stopping at what looked like a solid wall. He pressed something, and a section swung inward to reveal a narrow staircase. This house was built for people like me, people who make enemies. They descended quickly, Sung Jin and two other men flanking them. The staircase led to what appeared to be a command center. Multiple screens showing security footage from around the property, communication equipment, weapons storage. Jesus, Mara breathed. This was here the whole time. I told you, Hyunwoo said, moving to the screens. You don't know who I really am. But as Mara watched him work, coordinating with his men, tracking the attackers' movements, making split-second tactical decisions, she realized she was finally seeing the man she'd married. Not the polite stranger who shared her breakfast table, but the leader who commanded respect and loyalty from dangerous men. And she wasn't afraid of him. She was fascinated. Sir, one of his men called out, we've got a problem. They're not just here for Mrs. Kang, they're here to destroy everything. They've got explosives. Hyunwoo's expression darkened. How long? Maybe 10 minutes before they breached the main safe room. Mara watched her husband's face as he processed this information. She could see him calculating odds, weighing options, looking for a way to protect his people and his empire and her, all at the same time. There's another way out, she said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at her. The old service tunnel, she continued, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. From the kitchen to the gardener's cottage. I found it months ago when I was exploring. You probably don't even know it exists. Hyunwoo stared at her. You've been exploring the house? I've been living here for 3 years with nothing to do, Mara said. Of course I've been exploring. There's a whole network of old passages from when this place was built in the 1920s. Some of them aren't even on the modern blueprints. For a moment, the command center was silent except for the distant sound of gunfire. Then Hyunwoo smiled, really smiled, and Mara's heart stopped. Show me, he said. They moved as a unit through the house, Mara leading them through passages and shortcuts she'd discovered during 3 years of loneliness. It felt surreal, using her intimate knowledge of their home to help them escape from people who wanted to destroy it. But as they reached the kitchen and Mara showed them the hidden panel behind the pantry, she realized something that made her blood run cold. Hyunwoo, she said quietly, if they know about your security codes, if someone on the inside gave them access, they might know about the tunnels too, he finished, understanding immediately. As if summoned by their fears, the sound of footsteps echoed from the tunnel ahead of them. They were trapped. Back, Hyunwoo ordered, but it was too late. Men emerged from both directions, the tunnel ahead and the hallway behind. 6 of them, all armed, all wearing the kind of expressions that said they weren't interested in negotiation. Hyunwoo Kang, the leader called out in accented English, you've caused Kim Jun a lot of trouble. Not nearly as much as I'm about to, Hyunwoo replied, his voice deadly calm. Maybe, but first you're going to watch us take your pretty wife. And then you're going to tell us everything we want to know about your operations. Mara felt Hyunwoo's hand tighten around hers, felt the tension radiating from every line of his body, felt the moment when his careful control finally snapped. You want my wife? He said, and his voice was so quiet it was barely audible. You want to take her from me? The leader smiled. It's just business, Kang. Nothing personal. Nothing personal, Hyunwoo repeated, and something in his tone made the air itself seem to vibrate with danger. You think my wife is just business to me? He stepped forward, placing himself completely between Mara and the armed men, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the kind of authority that made grown men kneel. Let me explain something to you, he said. For 3 years I convinced myself that keeping her at a distance was protection, that not touching her, not claiming her, not showing the world what she means to me, would keep her safe. Another step forward. The men raised their weapons, but something in Hyunwoo's presence made them hesitate. But you know what I realized today, he continued. Distance doesn't protect the people you love. It just makes you weak. It makes you forget what you're willing to kill for. Mara's breath caught. Love. He'd said love. So thank you, Hyunwoo said, his smile sharp as a blade, for reminding me exactly what I'm capable of when someone threatens my wife. The explosion of violence that followed was swift and brutal. Hyunwoo moved like a force of nature, like 3 years of restrained violence finally unleashed. Sungjin and his men moved with him, a coordinated dance of lethal precision. But in the chaos, one of the attackers broke through their line. He grabbed Mara's arm, yanking her away from the wall, pressing a gun to her temple. "Enough!" he shouted. "Everyone stops or she dies." The room went silent except for the sound of heavy breathing. Mara felt the cold metal against her skin and realized with startling clarity that she wasn't afraid. She was angry. These men had invaded her home, threatened her husband, tried to destroy the life she was finally ready to fight for. "You made a mistake," she said quietly. "Shut up," the man hissed. "You made a mistake," she repeated, louder this time, "thinking I was just some helpless wife who needed to be rescued." And then, using a self-defense move her mother had taught her years ago, she drove her elbow back into his ribs, twisted out of his grip, and dove away from the line of fire. Hyunwoo's reaction was instantaneous and terrifying. The man who had dared to touch his wife was on the ground before Mara had even finished rolling to safety. When the violence ended, when the last attacker had fallen, when the only sounds were their own ragged breathing, Hyunwoo crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled Mara into his arms. The embrace was fierce, desperate, full of 3 years of denied emotion finally breaking free. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his hands running over her face, her arms checking for injuries. "I'm fine," she whispered. "I'm fine, but Hyunwoo—" "I know," he said, understanding what she couldn't say. "I know we can't go back. I know everything's changed. Is that what you want?" she asked. "To go back." Hyunwoo looked at her, really looked at her, and Mara saw the exact moment when the last of his walls came down. "No," he said. "I want to go forward, with you, as your husband, really your husband. Even though I'm not just a helpless wife who needs protecting." Hyunwoo's smile was soft and real and full of something that looked like wonder. "Especially because of that," he said. And then finally, after 3 years of distance and politeness and careful space, he kissed her. It was their first kiss, and it tasted like freedom. The kiss changed everything. Not just because it was their first, but because it was a claiming, mutual, fierce, and 3 years overdue. When they finally broke apart, breathing hard, Mara could see in Hyunwoo's eyes that the careful stranger she'd married was gone forever. In his place was a man who looked at her like she was worth burning the world down for. "We need to move," Sungjin said quietly, though his tone suggested he was reluctant to interrupt the moment. There could be more of them coming. Hyunwoo nodded but didn't release his hold on Mara. "The safe house. Compromised. If they had our security codes, they have everything." "Then where?" Mara asked. Hyunwoo's expression shifted into something that was part smile, part promise. "Somewhere they'll never think to look. Somewhere that's just ours." An hour later, they were in a small cabin nestled in the mountains outside Los Angeles. It was rustic, private, and completely off the grid. No security cameras, no electronic surveillance, no connection to Hyunwoo's known properties. "I bought this place years ago," he explained as they settled into the main room. "Before I met you. I thought someday I might want to disappear, start over as someone else." "And now?" Mara asked. "Now I don't want to be someone else," he said, his eyes finding hers across the room. "I want to be the man who deserves you." The cabin was small, just 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that opened into the living area. After the mansion, it felt impossibly intimate. There was nowhere to retreat, nowhere to maintain the careful distance that had defined their marriage. They would have to learn to be together, really together. "I should call my mother," Mara said, suddenly remembering. "She'll be worried if she can't reach me." "Already taken care of," Hyunwoo said. "Sungjin moved her to a secure location. She's safe." "You didn't ask me first." "No," he admitted. "I didn't. Old habits." Mara studied his face, looking for signs of the man who had made unilateral decisions about her life for 3 years. But what she saw instead was someone trying to learn new patterns, someone struggling to balance protection with partnership. "Next time," she said gently, "ask me first. We're in this together now, remember?" "Together," he agreed, and the words sounded like a vow. As evening fell, they found themselves sitting on the cabin's small porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. It was the first time in 3 years they'd simply existed in the same space without the weight of distance between them. "Can I ask you something?" Mara said. "Anything. Why did you really marry me? Not the official reason, the real reason." Hyunwoo was quiet for so long that Mara thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, almost vulnerable. "The first time I saw you," he said, "you were at your mother's apartment. I'd gone there to discuss the arrangement with your family, and you opened the door wearing this yellow dress, the same color as the one you had on today." Mara remembered that day. The terror, the desperation, the feeling that their world was ending. "You looked at me like I was dangerous," Hyunwoo continued, "but you didn't back down. You stood between me and your family, ready to fight if you had to. And I thought I'd never seen anyone so brave." "I was terrified," Mara admitted. "I know. But you were terrified and brave at the same time. Do you know how rare that is?" She turned to look at him, this man who had been a stranger for 3 years, but was finally letting her see him. "I told myself I was marrying you to protect your family," he said. "But the truth is, I was marrying you because I couldn't bear the thought of walking away and never seeing you again." "Then why did you keep me at such a distance?" "Because I was a coward," he said simply. "Because I was afraid that if I let myself love you, I'd destroy you. Men in my world don't get to have good things. Mara, we don't get to have love that lasts, or wives who stay, or children who grow up safe. But you wanted those things." "I wanted you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I wanted you so much it scared me. Every morning when I saw you at that breakfast table, every evening when I heard you humming in the garden, every night when I walked past your bedroom door. So I wanted to go to you. I wanted to hold you and talk to you and learn everything about you. Why didn't you?" "Because wanting something and deserving it are different things." Mara reached for his hand, threading their fingers together. "What if I told you that you deserve it, that you deserve love and happiness and a wife who chooses you every day?" Hyunwoo's eyes searched her face. "Do you? Choose me?" "I chose you 3 years ago when I said yes to the marriage," Mara said. "I chose you today when I refused to leave your side, and I'm choosing you now, knowing exactly who you are and what your world looks like." "It's dangerous," he warned. "Being married to me, really married to me, means you'll always be a target." "Then teach me to shoot," Mara said simply. "Teach me to fight. Teach me to be the kind of wife who can stand beside you instead of behind you." Hyunwoo stared at her for a long moment, then threw back his head and laughed, a sound of pure joy that Mara had never heard from him before. "What's so funny?" she asked. "I spent 3 years trying to protect you from my world," he said, "and you want me to bring you deeper into it." "I want you to trust me with it," Mara corrected. "I want to be your partner, not your responsibility." "Partners," Hyunwoo repeated, testing the word. "I like the sound of that." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Hyunwoo turned to face her fully. "Mara," he said, "I need you to know something. What happened today, what I did to those men. That's who I am. I'm not a good man. I've done things that would horrify you. I've hurt people, killed people, built an empire on violence and fear." "I know," she said quietly. "But when they threatened you, when they put their hands on you," his jaw clenched, "I would have burned the world down to keep you safe. I would have killed every one of them with my bare hands. And I wouldn't have felt sorry about it. I know that too. And that doesn't scare you." Mara considered the question seriously. Should it scare her? Should she be afraid of a man who could switch from tender husband to lethal killer in the space of a heartbeat? "No," she said finally. "It doesn't scare me, because that violence, that protection, it's not who you are. It's what you do for the people you love." "How can you be so sure?" "Because of the way you touch me," she said simply, "like I'm something precious. Because of the way you've spent 3 years keeping me safe, even when it meant keeping me away. Because of the way you look at me like I'm worth fighting for." Hyunwoo's breath caught. "You are worth fighting for. You're worth everything." "Then fight for this," Mara said, gesturing between them. "Fight for us. Fight for the marriage we could have if we stopped being afraid of it." "I don't know how to be a husband," he admitted. "I don't know how to share my life with someone." "I don't know how to be married to a mafia boss," Mara replied, "but we can learn together." Hyunwoo stood and pulled her to her feet, his hands framing her face in the moonlight. 3 years, he said softly. 3 years I wasted being afraid of this. Not wasted, Mara corrected. We needed those 3 years to become the people who were ready for this moment. "And are you? Ready?" Instead of answering with words, Mara rose on her toes and kissed him. This kiss was different from their first, slower, deeper, full of promise and possibility. When they broke apart, Hyunwoo rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said, the words barely a whisper. "I've loved you for 3 years, and I was too much of a coward to say it." "I love you too," Mara replied, and felt the last of the walls between them crumble to dust. "No one touches what's mine," Hyunwoo said fiercely, echoing the possessive declaration he'd made during the attack. "No one threatens what's mine. No one takes what's mine." "And I'm yours?" Mara asked, though she already knew the answer. "You're mine," he confirmed. "And I'm yours, completely, finally." As they stood together under the stars, Mara realized that their marriage was finally beginning. Not the arrangement they'd started with, not the careful distance they'd maintained, but something real and fierce and worth fighting for. They had claimed each other at last, and nothing would ever be the same. Years later. Mara Kang stood in the kitchen of their rebuilt home, humming softly as she prepared breakfast. The morning sun streamed through windows that no longer felt cold or distant, warming a space that had finally become what it was always meant to be, a home filled with love. The sound of footsteps on the stairs made her smile, heavy, familiar steps that no longer passed by her door, but came straight to her. "Good morning, Mrs. Kang," Hyunwoo said, wrapping his arms around her from behind and pressing a kiss to her neck. "Good morning, Mr. Kang," she replied, leaning back into his embrace. It was a ritual they'd developed over the years, this morning greeting that acknowledged how far they'd come from the polite strangers who used to share breakfast in silence. "Sleep well?" he asked. "Eventually," she said with a smile. "Someone kept me up rather late." Hyunwoo's laugh rumbled against her back. "I seem to remember you being an enthusiastic participant." The easy intimacy between them still felt like a miracle sometimes. After 3 years of distance, they'd had to learn everything about each other, how to share space, how to communicate, how to love each other without fear. It hadn't always been easy. There had been arguments, misunderstandings, moments when old habits tried to reassert themselves, but they'd fought for their marriage with the same fierce determination they'd shown that night in the mansion. And they'd won. "Sungjin called," Hyunwoo said, settling at the kitchen island while she cooked. "The last of Kim Jun's associates have been dealt with. It's over. All of it? All of it. We're safe, Mara. Really safe." She turned to look at him, this man who had become her partner in every sense of the word. He'd taught her to shoot, as she'd requested, taught her to fight, to protect herself, to be the kind of wife who could stand beside him in his world. But more than that, he'd learned to let her in, to share his fears, his plans, his heart. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, reading her expression with the ease of someone who'd made it his mission to know her completely. "Just us," she said. "How different everything is now. Better different. Much better different." Hyunwoo stood and crossed to her, pulling her into his arms in the middle of their sun-bright kitchen. "I love you," he said, the words as natural as breathing now. "I love you too," she replied, and kissed him with the easy affection of a woman who knew she was cherished. As they held each other in the morning light, Mara thought about the woman she'd been 3 years ago, lonely, isolated, living like a ghost in a house that wasn't a home. That woman couldn't have imagined this, a marriage built on trust and partnership, a love that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger. She thought about the man Hyunwoo had been, afraid to touch her, afraid to love her, convinced that distance was protection. He'd learned, as she had, that love wasn't something to be feared, but something to be fought for. Their marriage had begun as an arrangement, survived as a necessity, and bloomed into something neither of them had dared to hope for. a partnership of equals, a love story written in their own words, a home built on the foundation of choosing each other every single day. No regrets? Hyunwoo asked softly. Only one, Mara said. What's that? That we waited so long to really begin. Hyunwoo smiled and spun her around their kitchen, both of them laughing like the lovers they'd finally allowed themselves to become. Outside, Los Angeles hummed with life. Inside, the Kang house was filled with the warmth that had been missing for so long, the warmth of a marriage that had been claimed, fought for and won. After 3 years of silence, they had finally learned to speak the same language, love. Thank you for staying until the end. Korean Mafia Lovers has many more incredible stories. Subscribe now because your support helps us continue creating these emotional journeys.